Yeah. All right, for anyone online, we will be getting started here shortly. We're going to give it about another minute to get ready, and then we will call the meeting to order. Thank you. Louis Smart ready?
Were you able to pull Smart over? Running?
Okay, we'll wait for that and then we'll get started. Okay.
Yep.
Got it, thanks. All right. All right, so we will get started here shortly. And let's see, I'd like to call the City Council for King City, Oregon at 9:03 for May 17th, 2023 to order. Mr. Weston, will you please do roll call?
Councilor Moore.
Present.
Councilor Thompson.
Here.
Councilor Paulson. Here. Councilor Petrie.
Present.
Councilor Manala.
Here.
Mayor Fender.
Here.
And online, we have Councilor Ocholi.
Here.
Ronnie, can we mute the screen?
We're getting like a 30-second tape delay. So I can hear what people were saying 30 seconds after they say it.
Thank you.
All right.
And I see Councilor Ocholi has raised his hand, so you take that as you're on.
Perfect. All right. So, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have scheduled a legislative land use hearing related to the adoption of King City's first transportation system plan. The hearing format for this proceeding is different than the quasi-judicial land use proceedings, though members of the public provide testimony in the same manner. Members of the public may participate in person, in writing, or both. We ask that a copy of all written materials be submitted to our city clerk so that they can be made part of the record of the proceedings. The grounds for appeal of a legislative decision are contained in ORS Chapter 197, specifically ORS 197.620. Again, that's ORS 197.620. I'm going to take a side step for a moment just to address some criticisms that we have seen online regarding the timing of this public hearing. I would just like to highlight that in order to allow the testimony of as many people who want to testify, we need to provide ample time. So that is why most public hearings, at least in all the jurisdictions that I'm aware of, start at 9 a.m. They provide it all day long. We took into account those who could not get off work, therefore they are able to testify online. They can also submit written testimony. And I would just also like to highlight that all of us, except Lori, who is wonderfully retired, work full-time, and we've all taken personal days off to be here. So I appreciate that the timing didn't work for everyone, but I flatly reject that some of the criticism and the horrible things that have been said out there. So I just wanted to take a moment to put that on the record. All right, following a staff report, we will be taking public testimony. For in-person testimony, Please grab a number if you have not done so already. The podium is right there in the back. You can grab the number. Also in the back is going to be the hearing comment registration form. Please fill out your name and all other required fields. We have had a suggestion that those attending online should be able to testify first, since they probably are in a position where they might be at work or some other. So I think we will go ahead and do that. If there's anyone in the room that has an appointment or has to get off, I encourage you to swap numbers with other people if you want to get up quicker, right? So, but we will just take first come, first served. So, for testimonies via Zoom, please write your name, address, and whether you are in support, in opposition, or neutral in the comments section. Names will be assigned a number in the order received in the comment chat box. So we will try to accommodate getting to them first. All right. When I call your number, please give your hearing comment registration form to the city recorder. Identify yourself, state your address, and make your statement. The maximum time allotted for testimony shall be 3 minutes for individuals. I will put a timer on here, and you can see the time come down. When the timer goes off, then you need to wrap up very quickly your comment. Mr. Weston, will you conduct the first reading, please?
The first reading for ordinance number 2023-01, an ordinance adopting the first King City Transportation System Plan Land Use File 2301. Recital. Whereas Oregon Administrative Rule, OAR, Section 660, Division 12, the Oregon Transportation Planning Rule, specifies the requirements for State Planning Goal 12 that requires cities and counties to prepare and adopt local transportation system plans for lands within their planning jurisdiction as part of their comprehensive plan. And whereas OAR 660, Division 12, subsection 60 requires any comprehensive plan amendments to be evaluated according to the terms outlined in the OAR to demonstrate whether they have a significant impact on the transportation system. And whereas the TSP is a comprehensive 20-year plan to guide transportation investments within the planning jurisdiction of the City of King City and the urban growth boundary. And whereas the Oregon Transportation Planning Rule directs cities to adopt conceptual street maps into the TSP as a road plan for the City of King City's system of arterial and collectors. And whereas Volume 2 Transportation System Plan appendices contain background information and data to support the implementation of Volume 1, the King City Transportation Plan. And whereas in accordance with the Public Involvement and Communication Plan, PICP, the City of King City has provided several opportunities for public involvement in the transportation system plan development, including but not limited to a public project webpage, online open houses, mailed-in surveys, in-person tabling events, and community newsletters. Whereas the city provided the notice of the hearings before the Planning Commission and the City Council as required by ORS 227.186, subsection 4, and whereas on March 22nd, 2023, the King City Planning Commission held a public hearing and considered all public testimony and recommended approval and adoption of the Transportation System Plan with special considerations. And whereas on May 17th, 2023, the City Council of King City held a public hearing to consider the Planning Commission's recommendations, hear public testimony, apply applicable decision-making criteria, and to consider appropriate findings and conclusion in support of the adoption. And whereas based on the recommendations, evidence, and public testimony already in the record, and the evidence and testimony presented at the May 17, 2023 City Council public hearing, and whereas Exhibit A, Volumes 1 and 2 show the Transportation System Plan, maps, and projects, and whereas substantial evidence exists within the record to demonstrate that the proposed TSP, including the maps, projects, meet the local, regional, and state law requirements as described in the recommended findings and conclusions. Now therefore, the City of King City ordains as follows. Section 1, findings. Based on the findings of facts and conclusions of law contained in the staff report and findings included herein and by this reference made a part hereof, the City of King City Transportation System Plan is consistent with statewide planning goals, Oregon Transportation Planning Rule OAR 660 Division 12, Portland Metro Regional Transportation Functional Plan, the King City Comprehensive Plan, Metro UGB Division Ordinance 18-1427, Findings of facts in support of Volume 1 and 2 of the TSP are adopted by the King City City Council and attached as Exhibit A. Section 2, severability clause. If any section, subsection, sentence, clause, phrase, paraphrase, or portion of this ordinance is for any reason held invalid or unconstitutional by a court of competent jurisdiction, such portion shall be deemed a separate, distinct, and independent provision of such holding and shall not affect the validity of the remaining portion hereof. Effective date, this ordinance shall be effective 30 days after its adoption, read the first time on May 17, 2023, and moved to second reading by roll call vote of the City Council. Read the second time and adopted by the City Council on, it's still Blake, because we haven't gone that far.
Thank you. All right. Lastly, I just want to remind everyone to please put your phones on silent if you have not done so already. All right. All right. I call to order the public hearing regarding ordinance 2023-01, an ordinance considering the adoption of King City's first transportation plan, LU file 2023-01 at 9:13 a.m. on May 17th, 2023. This is a legislative hearing, so we do not follow the strict ex parte disclosure requirements. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the City Council to hear this matter? And we will give 10 seconds to those online, or a reasonable amount of time to respond. Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Does any member of the council want to disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any individual member of the City Council? Online.
Madam Mayor, did you get that question?
I have a point of order, Peter.
Yeah.
So we had a comment from the public. How do we respond to comments to that force? Do we ignore them unless they come up and state their name and do it procedurally?
I mean, I think people refer to the urban growth expansion area as Edgewater. In order to be a member of the King City City Council, you have to be an elector in King City, which means a registered voter. The Edgewater area is outside the
Rivermead is the area.
Oh, yeah, Rivermead area.
Woodland Terrace area.
Yeah, so none of you guys live in the expansion area. I mean, you can't, because the expansion area is in your urban growth management area, but outside of the city boundaries. In order to be on the City Council, you have to be inside the city boundaries, so no. If everyone could wait until the public comment time, we have the whole day assigned for this task, and we can answer questions at that point.
And I would say, just if you wouldn't mind my interjecting here, is the one thing that I could say is that the transportation system plan is citywide though. So if you happen to have a property that's going to be affected by a particular project that's identified as a transportation system plan, and you feel that it's going to create something, if there's some sort of monetary gain or monetary loss in your favor, then that might be something that you might want to disclose. Don't see any right-of-way acquisition near your property or on your property or anything like that. I think you're clear, but that might address the comments coming together.
All right, thank you. I will address also just procedurally. So going forward, any comment that is just blurted out, we're going to ignore. Any comment, I don't know, none of us, for those on Zoom, we do not monitor the comment section during any council meeting or during the public hearing, so your comments will just be ignored as well. If you want to make a statement, please do so in the manner at which you are required to do it, which is to officially come up and put it on the record. And likewise, this is not an opportunity for dialogue. We will not be responding to questions. We will not be engaging in dialogue. This is simply an opportunity for the public to put comments on the record before us and officially get those comments on the record. It's not, it's not going to be a conversation. We mean no disrespect. It is not, it's just not the process. And we have to adhere to the process, which is to simply listen to your comments, which we are gladly here to do so. So with that, let me go back and just address, I want to go back to if any member of the council wants to disclose an actual or potential conflict of interest. For me, I will simply state, right, that we all live within the city. I personally live on Capulet Lane. Capulet Lane is contained in the TSP. I don't believe that my personal property is going to be impacted either positively or negatively, so therefore I don't have any conflict, actual or potential, in my opinion, and therefore I'm not going to be putting any conflict on the record. I make that statement. I think it applies to all of us. I don't think anyone here is going to be somehow impacted, but in my opinion, for me personally, that doesn't rise. So I will give the opportunity for anyone that wants to make a statement from the council. We can do that. So if you want to disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest, you can do so now. All right. Hearing none, we will move on. So then we will revisit. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any individual member of the City Council? Hearing none. All right. For all those who wish to testify, please be aware that if you fail to raise an issue in person, on Zoom, or in written form, by letter or other written submission, or to the City Council, you will be unable to raise that issue at a subsequent time on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria that staff will describe, or other criteria in the plan or land use code which you believe applies to this decision. Failure to specifically address the approval criteria that staff will describe also precludes the raising of an issue related to those criteria on appeal. At this time, I call for the staff to present the proposal along with applicable approval standards and make a recommendation. Questions?
So I'd like to just do a brief PowerPoint presentation so you can get an idea of what we're talking about, what the concept of the transportation system plan is. It essentially looks at all of the infrastructure throughout the city, from 99W to Roy Rogers, from Beef Bend to the Tualatin River, and looks at where those infrastructure components are going to be. Get my computer to wake up. Darn. The purpose is essentially to guide the planning for the next 20 years. And we started this planning process in 2018. So a lot of our modeling figures were done in 2019, 2020. There have been updates to those modeling figures, updates to some of the expenses. Those things will be implemented in the final document. Some of the costs are implemented already. There are some other minor modifications that need to be done to the map that will be coming forward. Basically, the TSP uses the State of Oregon Transportation Planning Rule. As mentioned in the ordinance itself, when I read it, it also applies to Oregon Administrative Rule 660, Division 12, and then Metro Regional Transportation Functional Plan. In addition to that, we've also taken steps in the findings to address the urban growth boundary expansion, the Metro Rule 18. 1427. And those have all been addressed in the findings that are attached to the ordinance as Exhibit A. The CPR requires the following elements: a comprehensive understanding of multimodal transportation systems, a reasonable basis for estimating how the city and the surrounding region might grow and how we mitigate those impacts, evaluation of how the expected growth could be seen in the system and the performance of those intersections, and that's what you see in some of those mobility targets, as well as goals and policies of our transportation system plan, addressing multimodal needs, bike, ped, and transportation, freight, all those elements, transit as well. And the last final component is the funding aspect of it. You'll recall that we have FCS working on our system development charges right now, so they'll be coming forward with a proposal for the system development charges. A large chunk of that will be transportation systems. So when we look at the cost for our transportation systems and how we pay for those, it'll likely be a system development charge that would be applied at the time of development. Right now, I think we're proposing a citywide FCC, but I'll talk about that later. The Metro Regional Transportation Function Plan provides a framework for how we develop within the urban growth boundary and provides the regional and state transportation needs. It provides our local needs and solutions. It also identifies a number of things that we look for. Identified here, you'll see the 5 items: motor vehicle capacity, roadway connectivity, land use strategies, transit, bicycle, pedestrian projects, and transportation system management operations. These are in large part all the operations contained on what would be considered neighborhood routes, collectors, and bike and trail pathways. By 2040, we started with a vision that King City would grow with a smart and efficient transportation system that supports healthy and active citizens of all ages and abilities, where people can travel in safe and accessible and convenient manners, using the transportation options that allow for the user to meet daily needs. The transportation system is based off of the competitive economy that increases affordability and provides for an enhanced natural and cultural. By that, I think what we've tried to enhance or capture in the TSP is access to these natural spaces, trail network, like a robust trail network, a robust safety features on our roadways, such as buffered bike lanes, sidewalks, and pedestrian escapes, to keep everything walkable, keep everything close, and essentially through our phasing process in the transportation system plan, we came up with 7 goals that were identified: accessibility and connectivity, provided direct, continuous, and connected transportation facilities to minimize out-of-direction travel and decrease travel times for all users, complete gaps and increase access to transit. Goal 2 was safety and security, and so part of that was attractive streetscapes, bike, ped, multimodal trail networks, safe, attractive bike and pedestrian facilities along the trail networks as well. Goal 3 was healthy people and environment. So with this, we tried to look at ways that we could reduce vehicle noise travels, improve the public health by providing walkable and bikeable streets and trails, increase access to parks and natural areas, and mitigation and sensitive design for natural resources. Goal 4 was equity, and so we tried to reduce barriers and push for equity and inclusion throughout the Kingston Terrace area. Goal 5 was reliability and efficiency, and so we tried to optimize the transportation network system to ease congestion, build bike and trail networks, build infrastructure to support technological advances, and smart technologies such as like electric cars or autonomous. Goal 6 is the fiscal responsibility component. I was mentioning this earlier, but right-sizing the infrastructure to support the land use models, align and co-locate utilities where possible, develop and explore new and creative revenue sources to meet increased travel demand. Right now, we're looking at a number of ways that we can try to meet those financial needs. I think FCS has done a great job of trying to find some creative solutions for us. Finally, goal 7 was collaboration. Benefits and burdens of development are typically carried in a collaborative manner that ensure that street network has seamless connections and uses data analysis and performance-based planning to guide the decision-making along the way. Growth projections, King City, these are figures from our transportation system plan. King City's population was projected to be about 5,140 in 2015. These proved relatively accurate with the 2020 census data, which put us at 5,188. By 2040, we're estimating our population to be close to 14,000 overall. Jobs right now, we're sitting right around 800 to 900, and we're projecting that will be anywhere from 1,500 to 1,600 jobs by the time of completion. Growth projections as well with those increased trips that you're going to see. You'll see an increase of approximately 11,000 trips to our region, so you'll have about 49% growth rate, 50% growth rate on those trips for the next 20 years. Current system supports approximately 23,000 average daily trips by 2040. Those trips are projected to increase to nearly 40,000. The regional connectivity requirements for Metro Regional Transportation Plan require, to the extent possible, that arterials to be spaced at a 1 mile interval and collectors to be spaced at half-mile intervals, and neighborhood or local streets to be provided at every 530 feet. So the appendix in the transportation system plan identifies some of this information. Streets within the current city limits largely comply with these standards, with Southwest Fisher Road and Southwest 131st Avenue serving as collectors, and Oregon 99W, Southwest Deep Bend Road serving as arterials. We also have Roy Rogers, which would serve as an arterial as well. However, within our current city limits and our urban growth boundary, we do have several gaps that are identified, particularly in the Kingston Terrace area, including east-west connections between our current city limits and Roy Rogers, and north to south connections from Deep Bend to the Tualatin River. Proposed collectors and neighborhood routes are proposed to close those gaps. Image here shows kind of the unacceptable congestion that we see along Roy Rogers, Elsner, Deep Bend at 150th, 131st, Deep Bend and 99W, and 99W, Durham to Tualatin River. So everywhere that you see the orange or red lines are areas where we're projecting high impact of congestion without some sort of relief. Growth problems, our area obviously is challenging with the ravines that we have going through the Kingston Terrace area, and some of the areas within King City that are already developed and already constrained for access and opportunities. We're very limited on where we might be able to put facilities and how we might be able to get those facilities from. One of the things that we struggled with the growth was creating a robust transportation network that strives to diffuse traffic loads over multiple streets, particularly one main collector route and a series of neighborhood routes, spaced at approximately 530 linear feet for the Metro Transportation Planning Rule. Along these same routes, we are proposing pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and at some point those facilities are separated into multimodal facilities. This is particularly on the collector route. So what we would have is those starting right curbside with slight buffer and then being consolidated into a multimodal facility separated from the travel lanes, probably somewhere between 150th and where Myrtle Lane or 147th comes down. Other facilities have been identified as potential transit routes. Those include, the Kingston Terrace, Fisher Extension, talked about a small autonomous bus that might run a loop, probably a 6 to 8 person autonomous bus. We've talked about transit routes along Deep Bend, potential transit routes on River Terrace Boulevard on the west side, transit routes along Roy Rogers, and of course 99W. Along the way, we've kind of modified our maps from where we started. The original CSP had 2 main route collectors going through the area. We still have essentially 2 main neighborhood route / collectors going through the area. One is a collector that was identified on the southern route as alternative 2, which you can see with the solid black line toward the south. And then we have a mid-level neighborhood route that's on a little northern boundary to that as well. And when you look at the transportation system plan, those carry forward how those were designed. There's still some flaws in these maps that will need to be fixed prior to the master plan. The map on the upper right corner is the Backbone Street map that was pulled from our master plan. And then the map at the bottom is the current map out of the transportation system plan. In the Metro comments that are attached in Exhibit B, Metro has requested that we remove representation to the Beefin Natural Area trails. That's this one right here. Those trails are on the Metro maps right now, and that's why were included in our maps. But they've requested that we pull that because they're modifying their map. They don't want to illustrate a trail on there and set expectations that they might not be able to live up to. I think that's an easy fix. It's outside of our planning area and doesn't really affect any of our modeling data, so. So this is our current system of map. One of the things that was brought up at a community meeting that I just want to bring to your attention is that when we look at 15A, this one right here, at the this probably needs to think about extending over to 131st to provide a neighborhood route at that location. This would be along the southern border of Deer Creek, and right now it's constrained because there's a mobile home park there, and that's why I think it was left out, because we weren't planning routes through the mobile home park. But that is a large chunk of private property, and it was brought up at our meeting, and I think that the member of the audience made a good point on that. We're trying to adhere to the 530-foot linear rule. It makes sense that there's a very large chunk of property south of Deer Creek Elementary that would be suitable for an extension of a neighborhood route in that area if that one parcel, mobile home park, ever gets redeveloped. And so if we're planning accordingly and we're trying to make sure our plan meets those stipulations, it would make sense to have that extended. Another component that was brought up, and it's not necessarily in the TSP, but it is in the master plan, is that it would be area 7C on River and Watson Lane, which is this segment right here, has been identified in the master plan as having a right of way of, I think it was said 82 feet. That should really be 50 feet because we're trying to stay within the existing right of way. So I think a footnote in the TSP on that will resolve that situation, and then we can correct the language in the master plan at the next public hearing.
Are you talking about the width of the road?
The road itself is only 24 feet, and then there's a 8-foot strip for parking, and then I think like a 10-foot multi-use pathway. So when you do all the math, it's probably 40 feet from edge to edge. So single lane and a separated multi-use pathway on the south side. So that's the road design that comes from, I believe, about 14B all the way to 7I on this map here. So we would just need to make sure that we note that in both the master plan and the TSP, that the road profile at those locations needs to be that. There were some other points that I'll get to a little bit later. Check my notes really quick. I thought there was one other. I think that's good for now. These are aspirational projects, so these are the projects that are listed that we need to figure out funding for through the development of the Kingston Terrace as well as King City. You'll see a number of these projects are actually within King City boundaries, current city limit, and so part of the funding structure was citywide SDC. Just for those that don't understand what a system development charge is, system development charge is applied at the building construction. So when somebody applies to develop their property and build a house, then the system development charges are applied at that time. Part of the feedback from the alternatives analysis resulted in modification of the aspirational project map that I just showed you. And those reconciliation efforts are still being tweaked just a little bit. There's still a few that need to be identified. You'll see right on this map that there's a dotted line that comes down River Lane and jumps over to Montague. And it's identified as like a neighborhood route. And in our TSP, that's not identified because it's not a neighborhood route, it's supposed to be a local street. So that would be one that needs to get corrected. You also have where 155th, which is between this is 150th, and this is Elsner, and this would be about 155th. There might be, we need to look at the data for this particular intersection, but that might rise to the level of a collector intersection, so there may be need for an intersection at that location. The orange dots indicate where those traffic signals are. So right now we're projecting traffic signals at 137th, 150th, Elsner, and River Terrace Boulevard in this strip. That was another question that came up at the community meeting on Monday. Their concern was by adding additional intersections on Deep Bend, we would be promoting or encouraging people to pull off of Deep Bend and go take alternative routes. So fewer intersections we can have along Deep Bend, I think the better Deep Bend will perform. In January of this year, the City Council approved 14 projects for inclusion in the Regional Transportation Plan. I apologize for the small font. 14 in the Regional Transportation Plan. These are roads and corridors that have been identified to have a regional significance. These facilities should qualify for state and federal funds, whereas other facilities within King City may not. The projects listed here are King City specific and do not include Deep Bend or Roy Rogers, which are technically Washington County sponsored facilities and under Washington County. Questions on the RTP stuff? You guys have already seen it in previous tests.
These corrections that you're referring to that need to be made, when will they be made?
On the map, they're actually underway right now.
Okay.
So you'll see them before the final. There's just some really minor amendments, really, when you look at the whole scope of it. And I think Carl's staff has been working on those maps already for the last week, because Metro told us about this like last week. So that's when we learned about this. So then we sent it over to DKS that Metro would like us to remove any representations of trails and roads on their properties, and so that's what we're trying to do.
And the other thing that Metro, and we've had a lot of conversations with Metro, obviously. The other thing that they specifically want is, we had done kind of bubble zoning, so we have, circles that demonstrate kind of what we're looking for. And what they want is really a more site-specific designation, and part of what kind of made that conversation happen was the Bankston property. We've been having, obviously, a lot of conversations about that property, with the, Columbia Land Trust, their in-house lawyer, their outside counsel. We hope to get on the same page with them. We haven't been able to. We've tried to demonstrate to Metro over the last 5 years that we're doing all that we can in order to protect that area from, I'll just call it the benefits or the burdens of urbanization. And so part of the conversation that we've had with Metro relates to zoning. So, and you probably all read Metro's letter. They found that we've met their condition. They're entitled to vast deference in interpreting their own conditions, just like you are entitled to vast deference interpreting your city code and any conditions that you would put on something. But I think what I suspect our recommendation will be to you is, when we actually get to that zoning, is a park/open space on all or most of the property, because we can't protect that conservation easement from the burdens of a road. But as far as the development adjacent to that road, that will impact the, and Ms. Bankston disagrees with this, but Metro doesn't. So that the adjacent uses will impact the conservation easement as well. So that's another way that we can get it. That's what Metro is looking for, and Metro kind of gets final say on everything. So we're trying to get what they want.
I have a quick question, Mike. Can you note for us, I think just following up to Council Thompson, for some of these changes, so that we can ensure that these items that you're presenting to us make it into the changes at the next reading, will you keep a list for us going so that we can go back and say, hey, you can refresh our memory that the changes that you talked about today have in fact been done at the next meeting, right?
So, I mean, the two that I talked about was the right-of-way, width at River or Watson. I think it's Watson Lane technically. River Lane's the one that goes to the south. But the right-of-way there on 7C, being a 50-foot right-of-way, and the road should fit into the 50-foot right-of-way where possible. And then 15A, being a planned neighborhood route, should probably, really up to the council, but our suggestion was that should probably be mapped to extend to 131st Street, even though the mobile home park is there, not expected to be put there unless the mobile home park does develop. But it would be the expectation that if that property ever did develop, that they would need to sell that. Yeah. So those were the two that I was suggesting at this point. And then the removal, sorry, I'll put that one down.
Yeah.
Removal of the trail, along Deep and Natural.
And then I think it would be helpful just to note any changes to the graphics, right? That when we swap them in and out and so forth, I think it would just be helpful to note that at the next one that this change had been made.
I'm going to go back one slide because I think two slides. I think it's important to note that on this map 11B that you see right here, where 155th comes in, it's only a enhanced pedestrian crossing. It's not an intersection in our transportation. That's because 11 is identified as a neighborhood route. and Washington County will not recommend neighborhood routes as connections to their arterial.
Okay.
So at this point in time, that's identified as a enhanced pedestrian crossing, but I think that was one of the changes that I asked Carl's crew to make on that and represent it as a intersection just in case, so that we were capturing what an intersection would cost for that location in our estimates.
Thank you.
So I will add that on here to the 155th intersection. I'll move ahead to other slides. One of the things that we worked on, this is a typical cross-section for our city-wide neighborhood route. There are 2 travel lanes and buffered bike lanes, and you have separated walk paths. We can implement some clean water services and stormwater features in these buffer areas between the bike lane and the walk path. And we've been working with Clean Water Services on what that might look like. This is your cross-section for your rural character road, where it has the 2 travel lanes, buffered parking interspersed, and then a separated multi-use pathway on the south side. Most likely, this will be the cross-section from 150th over a little ways until the sidewalks get joined on the south side and it turns into the multi-use pathway on the south side, and then you wouldn't have that sidewalk on the north side. Also some images here of what that might look like. In the corner. When we talk about what it's going to look like, just have a couple notes here. The rural character is supposed to provide functional transportation services with adequate and safe bike and pedestrian facilities. As Kingston Terrace Boulevard makes its way east toward Fisher, it is designed to step down in scope and scale to its narrowest point crossing the banks and easement. Bike and ped facilities will need to be consolidated on the south side at this point, and will continue through the West Side Trail segment, following King Lear to 131st, then to an aspirational riverfront trail, or alternatively taking a more northern route, following an aspirational bike trail network connecting into the pre-existing system. So when we talk about the crossing on the Bankston property, we have this image of a nice bridge that's up in River Terrace, and just recently done. This is actually a bottomless culvert that's built along the same system up 150th. One of the things that the Planning Commission asked for and asked us to focus on was to come up with cost estimates on what the bridge costs were. So we came up with bridge cost estimates of $200 to $300 per square foot, and put those into the spans that we might see across the banks and easement versus what a bottomless culvert might run us. The differences are a bit substantial, but you can kind of get an idea of what those costs are, anywhere from, depending on if it's the minimum bridge, then you're looking at, $600,000 to the 150-foot span, $2 million, or you go top of bank to top of bank, which would be a huge bridge at, $4 to $5 million. I don't think anything like that would be required in this situation. I think that's like worst case scenario. But most likely what you'd be looking at is either a bottomless culvert, cost about $1.5 million, or you could go with a bridge style, with a little bit of a larger span, somewhere between the minimum and the 150-foot maximum. Some of the designs that we've come up with on the central neighborhood or the main street have higher height limits in the main street area, so you're going to have more population density in these areas. You still have your two travel lanes, so you're gonna have on-street parking, buffered bike lanes on the backside of the parking, and then a, pretty robust sidewalk feature of 10 feet or more. Right now, I think this one says 8 feet for the sidewalk standard for, the main street. So from what we've seen is that it's 8 feet of that sidewalk plus the planted trees. So you also have this additional 6 feet in there as well. So a lot of it is a big stretch of sidewalk adjacent to the, bike lanes that are buffered. Some of the folks that we've talked to on the Main Street area would like to do, head-in parking instead of parallel parking. So this might add some width to the streetscape if they did that. But they also have parking in the back of these as well. So they're talking about residential parking in the back and customer parking up front along the River Terrace Boulevard area in the Main Street. This south one, the one that you see on the bottom, is kind of your cross-section for the collector street from Elsner to Roy Rogers through that Main Street Town Center area. And like I mentioned before, it would end up getting necked down a little bit. One of the things that was brought up as well at the Planning Commission was the design of Beef Bend and what that's going to look like. And so I brought in, just a cross-section of what Beef Bend might look like. So what we talked about is 2 travel lanes and an intermittent turn lane at intersections, and then a potential island planter in areas where there are no intersections, and then a separated multi-use pathway on both the north and south side with on-street bike lanes as well. So this would be your profile for Beef Bend from probably Roy Rogers all the way over to close to 100 and, well, at least to 150th, I imagine. And hopefully we can carry on the profile a little bit further as well and continue that on. The idea here is that these separated bike paths, bike and ped paths on the north and south side would come together with the travel lanes at the intersection and then split back off after the intersection. We've also implemented a number of design facilities to provide safe harbors for pedestrians and bicycles. Part of our plan is that by providing these safe harbors, we're creating safe bicycle and pedestrian facilities and safe crossing points and trying to make walking and biking more user-friendly. One of the other design safety features that we've looked at is how to provide traffic calming and slow down vehicles. So through implementation of these traffic circles, implementation of narrowing or necking down the streets prior to intersections, painted and buffered bike lanes, refuges in between travel lanes. All these are designed to provide for safe harbors for bike and pedestrians, and they're all identified in our transportation system. Next is a series of robust parks and trails that would interconnect the Kingston Terrace area into King City. This image here was an image that's in our master plan currently. Of course, it's going to need to be modified a little bit based on Metro's request to remove the Beef Bend natural area from our area. But these are the trails and where we think that bike and pedestrian facilities may be located and how they would interact with our systems already in King City. A number of trail features and designs that are called out, and these cross sections are in your transportation system plan. They range from a 7-foot walkway to a 17-foot multi-use pathway with bike and pedestrians using those facilities. But it also gives us a range, so it gives us the 10 to 12 to 14-foot pathways where necessary, and provides us a wide is the funding strategy components that I was mentioning earlier. These numbers are holding fairly true. Despite the increased transportation costs. Right now, our transportation system development charge is estimated at about $20,000 per dwelling unit. And then our parks SDC is closer to $12,000 to $13,000. That's because some of those trails that are adjacent to the transportation network are part of the parks system and were previously under the transportation network, so those kind of got moved over. But overall, right now, when we look at this, our FDCs for King City are hovering right around $30,000 to $33,000 for just us. Then we also, on top of that, have water, sewer, school excise, construction excise, transportation development tax, about some of them. So there's 5 other SDCs that are tacked on. So it's almost $60,000 out of the gate. And so when we look at where we sit, we're pushing it. We're getting up there. When we look at our costs, we are probably comparable to Frog Pond, where we're currently a little higher than South Hillsborough. Initially, these initial numbers at 38,000 were preliminary numbers. Those have gone up a bit based on the 2023 figures that we've adjusted for with the inflation. So we went from about 38,000 to closer to 60,000. So we're still not the highest in the land, but we're pushing it up a bit. So that, of course, affects affordability. And then with affordability, then you have to figure out how to manage that. So maybe you add more density, but adding more density, then you reduce livability. There's all these balancing components that we need to be considerate of. Our project list is pretty similar to what you see here. It might change slightly. Most of these were taken from the previous maps before they were reconciled. So the numbers are still relatively accurate. The descriptions are still relatively accurate. These are what was entered into our regional transportation plan in January. These are our Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects that you see here, and what we're projecting will be accomplished over the next 15 years. Ultimately, King City has an estimated revenues of $130 to $140 million over the course of the next 20 years. We are projecting approximately 40 to 50 million worth of aspirational projects will go unfunded through 2040 and need to be identified as strategic or unconstrained. So projects that I showed you on the previous list are those that we believe will be funded, and then we still have some that are unfunded that we'll need to get some grant funds for other assistance. Final is over the course of the next 20
Mike, I
years,
apologize. Just one more. Ronnie, someone's not on mute. Can you please place them on mute? Okay.
That's right.
Thank you. Sorry.
So over the next 20 years, we've looked at how we can promote electric vehicles, how we can promote alternative transportation routes. Here's an image of a nifty autonomous bus that you can program to run on a loop, and it'll run your loop, and they're relatively inexpensive. You can do it as a local option. This is what we talked about earlier when we were talking about the possibility of some potential transit along the Kingston Terrace Boulevard or Fisher extension, and then running along a loop connecting east and west. We've also imagined how we can implement electric bike stations, electric scooter stations throughout the King City and Kingston Terrace area, particularly along the West Side Trail segment. where we'll have a critical link over to Heritage Pines and the Tualatin Wildlife Refuge to the south. There's also option for waterway access there and kayak lockers and things of that nature. So these are all implements of smart technologies that we were trying to work with our partners at Portland General Electric or even Kinder Morgan on how we might be able to implement these things at certain locations. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have on where the transportation system plan lies. In your document are the findings associated with the transportation system plan. And I didn't really dive into the findings, the facts and conclusions of the law just because it's extremely dry reading. I just wanted to give you more of an overview of where the transportation system plan lies today. What I can do is just give you the executive summary and go from there. Essentially, our recommendation to the city council is that we conduct the first reading, which we did today. We hold the public hearing, which we're doing today as well. And then upon closure of the public hearing, the city council would need to deliberate and render a decision on the King City Transportation System Plan. The council has options to adopt. You can adopt with amendments. You can remand it to the planning commission. They deny the application. What our recommendation is to conduct the first reading, which we've done, conduct a de novo hearing, which is what we have on the agenda today. And staff recommendation is to adopt ordinance 2301, the King City Transportation Plan, Land Use File 2301, and then conduct the second reading of the ordinance by short title only.
Thank you, Mike. Questions?
Yeah, it was my understanding we weren't voting on anything today, though.
That's correct, yeah. So today, what the council would need to do is conduct the first reading, which we've already done, and hold the public hearing. And then you can ask questions at the end, and we'll be here to answer them. And then we would close the public hearing and reconvene on June 14th to deliberate and render a decision.
And hopefully by then, we would have the maps to do things like remove the Metro Trail and my most recent meeting with Metro's land use attorney was on Friday, but I think that the consensus is as far as the property zoning, that's probably going to happen as part of the comp plan. That's kind of their expectation. So you won't necessarily see that on June 14th, but you'll see that as as we bring the comp plan back.
I have a question. Have anyone looked at like raised intersections to help slow down vehicle traffic and make it safer for pedestrians and bicycles?
I think that's one of the features that you see in the implementation on that. Definitely looking at ways to separate crosswalks from lanes through nice design features that have worked at other places. But yeah, that was one of the things that we had talked about as well, is those vertical impediments at intersections.
Other questions? No? Let's give Smart, do you have any questions for Mike? Hearing none, we will proceed. All right. All right, thank you. All right, we will now move on to the testimony of our audience members. Again, at the beginning, for those who have come later, we are going to move first to those who are online, and then we will get to those individuals here in person. So first, we will take any member of the audience who wishes to speak in favor of this application. And so first, we will please, if you are here to testify in favor online, please indicate to Mr. Smith, and then,
Martha,
okay.
maybe?
Is this for me?
Yes, Martha.
Yes, hello,
Okay.
Martha.
Thank you.
And just, please, state your name and address for the record, and then you will have, 3 minutes. Let me just get the, bear with me while I set the, all right. So I'm gonna set the timer, and then please, state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Martha Iancu, Iancu, and I'm at 15715 Southwest Queen Victoria Place. And I have just a list of items here that are my concerns about the proposal. And number one, the Metro Title 13 requirement to protect the areas identified as riparian habitat and upland wildlife habitat on the Metro inventory map must be enforced. No infringement should be allowed, and this includes crossing any part of the Bankston Reserve easement. My concern is especially strong in light of the information that the developers may expect to be able to fill in ravines. Second, if long cul-de-sacs are problematic, I suggest just not developing any of the peninsulas that are too narrow to make a loop. This would allow for more continuous habitat for local species. I object, point number 3, I object to having an arterial, no matter how minor, running through King City neighborhoods to facilitate transit of Tigard residents to 99W. There need to be objective assessment measures for the protection of natural habitat and species, just as there are objective assessment measures for safety, for example. I think that's important so that that will become a more concrete goal for people in the process. I suggest that King City plan to have an intra-city transit service. If this were designed well, it could help reduce automobile traffic and make it easier for the seniors in Old King City to access shopping and services in the new town center. 6, the main advantage of alternative number 2 over alternative number 3, according to the information in the packet, is that it is most likely to secure public funding from state, regional, and county sources that would reduce the need for developer funding. Maybe I've misunderstood this, but if this means that it makes things more economical for developers, I don't think it should be given that much weight. Alternative number 3 probably has fewer risks of landslides and flooding than alternative number 2, which also should be taken into consideration in making that decision. Then number 7, I am concerned about the influence of developers at every level of this process. And I'm asking that you please postpone the decision until after Clean Water Services completes its study and you've had a chance to apply that to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for comments. I am well aware that everyone understood that was a comment in opposition. I note it for the record. This was the time for comments in favor of the plan. So we will just note that. I apologize.
You have to click the top.
Oh, up here. Sorry. All right. Thank you. All right. So we will go back and call for any audience member who wishes to speak in support of the plan. There is none who have identified on Zoom. Is there anyone here today who wishes to speak in favor in person? Based on, and seeing none, we will now move on. Are there any other audience members who are appearing or attending on Zoom who wish to speak in opposition to this application? Please indicate to Mr. Smith online, and we will hear your testimony first. There are no other audience members who are attending on Zoom who have indicated that they wish to speak. I note that we just heard from one individual in opposition. So now we will move on to members joining us here in the room. You each have a number, so please come up to the podium in the order of your packet. When you get up to the podium, please state your name and address for the record. I have tried to choose the least offensive alarm, so let me go back.
On the left.
Done. All right, 3 minutes. Okay. And, all right, we're starting at with number 10? All right, number 10, please come up, state your name for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Website anyway.
And Mike, do we, I don't know, we should probably take a break at 10:30 for a few moments just for a bio break. So we'll get through a few testimony. We'll take a short, 3-minute break for everyone to stretch and go to the restroom, and then we'll come back and continue on. So with that, please state your name. And when you begin, I will start.
Okay, my name is Debbie Walsh, 14120 Southwest River Lane. And I'm against Fisher Road Extension, period. Well, I mean, you want to do it past 150th, that's fine. But the amount of traffic you're going to run through Edgewater is ridiculous. I was trying to do some numbers this morning, a little late. Everything in the pamphlet is just comments from Edgewater and local people. But yesterday, when we were at that meeting, we were talking about overflow traffic, what's going to come down here. And in Newburgh, I looked up some numbers, 39,000 cars a day on 99. You have 24,000 cars a day on Roy Rogers now, before Tiger's new bill goes in. And we're going to take 40% of that overflow, is what you said, plus 60% of our new bill, which is whatever, all going through Edgewater. That's a little crazy. I mean, we all know I'm adverse to the hurting the Bankston, but that kind of traffic is ridiculous. And I still say go back to the charrette, the #1 plan. King City is a city of cul-de-sacs. Everybody has a cul-de-sac, and you're going to destroy Edgewater. That's a lot of traffic. No matter how you look at those numbers, that's thousands and thousands of cars a day. And it doesn't seem like there's ways to avoid it. Metro's not going to stop you from building just because you don't slam a highway through a local neighborhood. They want the housing that bad. They'll let you use Beef Bend. Obviously, I mean, he's got good plans for Beef Bend. 2 lanes, bike paths, and you're going to have some interconnectivity, and you're going to have the little communities off it, just like Wake Oswego, just like you have now. You have forward slope communities. And to throw a highway through it, the one where you have all the children, just seems really, really stupid. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but it just doesn't seem right. And it doesn't seem right we have to stand and beg for our houses, for our communities. And, we're getting close. So that's my point, is if you look at the traffic count and take 40% overflow, so it saves only 25% of the actual count. That's crazy out of 40,000 on one side and another 30,000 on the other side. And then we're going to get Bull Mountain. They're coming down because I drive for a living. I'd be using it. I would. I cut all through King City to get home. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you for your comments. All right, number 11. please state your name and your address for the record, and then you will have 3 minutes to speak.
My name is Barbara Davis. I live at 1676 Southwest Queen Anne, which is the intersection with the stoplight, Queen Anne and Royalty Parkway. And I have a big bay window in my kitchen, so I have a 180 view of Royalty Parkway. And I can tell you already that the number of people I see on Royalty that clearly do not live in KCCA is abhorrent. They come out of the manufactured home park and the apartments already off of Fisher Road and zoom down Royalty to avoid 99, which adds traffic to Fisher. I came northbound on 99 yesterday at 4 o'clock, well before rush hour. It took me 3 lights to turn left onto Fisher Road. What's going to happen to traffic on 99 when you put 25 more 100 houses in and traffic on Fisher Road? And how am I going to get out of Queen Anne and turn left onto Fisher Road? Or am I going to have to zigzag up till I get to an intersection with a light to turn left? You are severely impacting the lives of those of us that live in KCCA by all of that nonsense. I consider it nonsense, and I agree. Everybody wants it. We want to live the way it was when we moved in. I get it. But, I do not believe that this council is representing the members of KCCA appropriately. You're not looking at our mobility issues. We are not going to be walking on Fisher Road. We are not going to be taking our walkers, our electric wheelchairs, or our bicycles on Fisher Road. It's just, and we're the beginning of this. And I feel like, as a member of the KCCA, or as you call it, Original King City, I am being disrespected by all of this. I just don't feel like the members of that core community of the KCCA are being adequately considered. And you got 40 seconds back.
Thank you for your comment. All right, number 12. Oh, I apologize. We have someone who's requested to take a quick bio break now. So we're going to take 3 minutes and then we'll call you up. So let's take.
I just remembered, that was the Fisher intersection, so I'll add that to the list.
Okay.
Well, I think it's going to be those get wound up and start saying very important. I know. Can you take your time? Sorry.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Can I go use the restroom?
Great. Oh, no. Yeah, it's a I don't think anybody else has done that one yet. But when I say one person, part of that is, we are not running for city council position.
I know, I mean, it's the back.
So now everybody, but I was shocked. 5 years, yeah, you guys, very good.
So that was one of the things that,
Right about it, yeah.
so the numbers might be higher, but they're not that good.
And when I.
Yeah, you got upside down. think that needs to be in there. I don't know if they've got, looking at the operational project, and I didn't see it on the map, but I saw it on the old one. Yeah, I mean, the AC's on
Yeah.
You guys are ready.
Because I called him and told him that I had a record. And he started. You're back in the day of bowling. Yeah, I know. I was most concerned about traffic on that, you know, I was trying to get in. But, and if there's a run. Well, the thing that's scary is, if it got that fast, people are not full of the fire exit, because they just went out right through it. True. They did. Yeah.
Back on the record. All right. I'll call the meeting back into order following a short break. And now we will take comments by number 12, and that is Mr. Russell. We are ready for you, sir. Let me just Oh, I'm sorry, not Mr. Russell, Mr. Mitchell, I apologize. And go ahead and state your name and your address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Okay, great. My name is Gary Mitchell. I live at 12350 Southwest King Lear Way here in King City. I'm one of your neighbors. I'm a resident. You're my neighbor. And I hope that your deliberations on the transportation plan will respect each other as neighbors and consider all of our concerns. To the King City Council, I appeal the action of the Planning Commission at the 3/22/23 public hearing on the draft King City Transportation System Plan. The appeal met all requirements of the King City Municipal Code 216-100 appeal to City Council. At the May 3rd special council session, you voted to revise the code to state that the appeals can be made to decisions only under section 216-070A, instead of applying to actions and recommendations under section 216-070B. You have the authority to change the code. The city manager informed me the code change and that my appeal was not valid. My appeal has not been processed and forwarded to the PC, Planning Commission, for resolution, as was required by the municipal code at the time of my appeal. Thus, you are applying the change to the municipal code retroactively. Now, you, the council, depend on the Planning Commission to fully consider matters and forward thoroughly evaluated reasoned recommendations to you. It's the function of the Planning Commission to research and resolve public input and compliance issues before recommending or not recommending to the City Council. My appeal was about whether the PC fulfilled its duty per Municipal Code 216070, powers and duties of the Planning Commission regarding compliance or non-compliance with ordinances, resolutions, regulations, or laws. Now, I hope that your deliberations that you'll be doing in the next hearing will consider the issues raised in the appeal, because I think those are important so that you don't make premature or anyway. The TSP states, page 56, Fisher Road also has a minor arterial designation for its role in the Regional Transportation System Plan. However, the east-west circulation analysis, alternatives analysis on page 15 states the emphasis will be on accommodating local circulation needs rather than regional traffic. The current King City Comprehensive Plan and the King City Municipal Code applies to the West King City planning area, which is Edgewater. As per the comprehensive plan, Fisher Road is to extend to the approximate center of Edgewater and transition. Am I done?
Your time is up, so wrap it up, please.
All right, I'll let you finish reading what I was going to say, but I refer you that to ORS 92285 regarding retroactive ordinances. Now, both the existing code and the comprehensive plan, if it's changed, will be applied as a retroactive ordinance. And
Mr. Mitchell, we're going to end it there. Thank you.
I've included
It's in here.
information for you to read about that.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. All right. We will move on to number 13, please. And I'll say it again. Say your name and address for the record, and then we will, you will have 3 minutes.
My name is Shahid Simoni. I live at 16675 Southwest King City, 97224. I'm here to object to King City, to Fisher Road extension. You're going to extend that road, you're destroying our community, Edgewater. That's a highly populated area already, and you put in that road, extend that road. You are increasing the noise, the amount of noise there. We have so much noise there, but a lot of children in that area, elderly people there, and you're going to increase a lot of confusion there. And traffic, and traffic. We don't need the traffic. We don't need it. And to be honest, I don't even understand what the purpose of extending that Fisher Road is. I don't see. We have Beef Bend takes all the traffic. So going through Fisher Road, right through us there, I don't see the purpose of that. And I also have a comment on what you've done on corner of Fisher Road and 131. To be honest, I don't know what that construction is. You put a little road across there, cut all the natural grass there, and it doesn't look, I don't see the purpose why it was that. If it's private property, okay, but I don't think it's private property. If it's city property, I honestly don't understand what's the purpose of cutting that natural grass and trees, putting the new grass, what? And that's all messing up our Fisher Road and our community. That's what I'm looking at. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Number 14. Good morning. And state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. My name is Victoria Frankeny. I am the Riverkeeper and staff attorney for Tualatin Riverkeepers. For those who may not be familiar with our organization, we are the only nonprofit that's focused on protection and restoration of the Tualatin River, which has been designated as a national water trail since 2020. We have testified both written and verbally at previous council meetings to get to this point right here. We ask you to vote no against the Fisher Road extension. First, it should come as no surprise to you that the Tualatin River has been experiencing increased rates of sediment that's been deposited via the streams that exist in the Kingston Terrace area. This is a result of unmitigated storm water runoff created by increased impervious surfaces in the surrounding area. This runoff has eroded those streams to such a degree that sediment islands are created right where they meet the Tualatin. This not only poses a serious threat to water quality, but also to aquatic life and recreation. The city proposes to cross these streams at their most vulnerable locations at some parts, thereby creating a heavy monetary fee for the city and a serious threat to water quality. Having a further north alternative route would alleviate some of those stressors on these drainage points and would be more cost effective for the city in the long term in regard to maintenance. Additionally, Clean Water Act Section 404 and the Department of State Lands wetland removal fill permits must be obtained prior to any road development. The permitting process should begin sooner rather than later, as there is a significant threat that these permits will be denied if it is found that the project goes against the public interest and/or a more reasonable alternative has been identified that serves the need with less of an environmental impact. In the event that the permit is denied, King City would need to reinitiate the adoption process, thereby requiring further public input and further delaying the progress that the city hopes to achieve. The Army Corps of Engineers involvement triggers also other federal requirements, including an ESA consultation and environmental analysis under the National Environmental Policy Act, and consultation with the tribes under the National Historic Preservation Act. These are all requirements that must be met under federal law, and while yes, these permits are generally not required until development, both agencies will consult with the city ahead of time to identify issues prior to shovel hitting dirt. Lastly, I just want to acknowledge that the proposed road alternative will bisect wildlife habitat connectivity created by the Beef Bend Natural Area, the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge, Heritage Pines Nature Area, and the Basin Conservation Easement. In doing so, the road not only poses a threat to wildlife, who generally traverse along stream corridors, but also safety to those who are driving that route. We urge the city to consider a less impactful alternative and to adhere to the requirements set forth under federal and state law. We understand the need to accommodate growth in the area and provide safe routes for existing and future residents of King City. However, there is a way to achieve these goals and create neighborhoods that coexist rather than conflict with nature. And the city has thus identified them in their own metro-mandated alternatives analysis. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Number 15. Please state your name for the record and your address, and you will have 3 minutes.
I'm Frank Hay, 168 Southwest Middle Avenue. And what I'm speaking about today is how do you want to be remembered? I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. For all the council for King City at a pivotal moment in the city's history. I've spoken with most of you, at least a little, and heard all of you speak on behalf of your concerns and desires for King City. You're kind, you care, and you want the best for the city. Now is a critical time for you to decide, what are you going to be remembered for? Many of us are concerned about the things we read and hear from the city. I'd like to highlight some of these things for your information and consideration. There are affirmations in the plan about protecting natural systems and the environment. However, the actual plan is to run the main road through a conservation easement with high levels of erosion that is also within a landslide zone per a map already in your records. So how will this judgment look to the leaders and citizens who follow you? City staff has engaged with posts on Nextdoor, giving inaccurate information to the public, including the easement is filled with blackberry, ivy, and trash, and needs to be cleaned up and restored. That King City's road through the easement will solve the erosion problem, and that King City will do restoration in the easement. All of you have seen the easement and know it is not overrun with blackberries. It's well documented by yearly photographs by Columbia Land Trust. Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District has been restoring the vegetation for 5 years of their 30-year restoration lease on the easement. King City has no resources for doing restoration work in the easement. How will people feel upon finding out that the city has provided them with this sort of misinformation? It has the potential to color their opinion of the trustworthiness of the city. City staff has also provided inaccurate information to the public via email. In the record of the Planning Commission's email public comment, concerns about putting a road through the easement got an email response inviting them to come in and meet with staff and get the city's version of the situation. Then the public comments, including the staff comments, were placed in the packet for the Planning Commission, rather than just the public input. What is the interpretation of these acts, what interpretation of these acts will be put on it by those reading it in the future? On the record of the Planning Commission meeting, the city attorney asked the Columbia representative and myself potentially legally binding questions, knowing that we were both represented by counsel and were not present. Is this within the standards that you want to uphold? Constructing a road through the easement is the opposite of protecting it to the maximum extent possible, as the condition was originally written on and agreed to. No mitigation will be able to make up for the damages, and I urge you to give this issue the thoughtfulness and care that it deserves, because whatever decision is made will be what, for, and how you are remembered. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We've been, Council Moore has asked that we get a microphone up for the podium. Can we use one?
Check. Does it work? Check.
All right. Now we will move on to number 15. I apologize, number 16. All right, please state your name and your address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Mike Meyer, 16950 Southwest Meyer Lane, Tiger. I could go on for a long time on this, but I only have 3 minutes. I'm going to make a very simple plea, that is move the road to the north. There's been 2 primary concerns. That's the location of the collector and the crossing of the conservation easement. I've been at this for 5 years. We organized site tours that you could all see how ridiculous it was to site that collector road on the southern portion. It was determined that alternative 1 was off the table because it was just not possible. I look at alternative 1 as the first worst, alternative 2 is the second worst, and the third alternative is the third worst, and so on. If you put the road further north, Be closer to the highest density area, which makes sense, right? You have a high volume roadway, you put it where the high density is. It's closer to transit. Why would you put the road at the furthest southern boundary and then force everybody using transit to go to the furthest location in Kingston Terrace? Just doesn't make sense. Jessica Phelps, in her letter to the city, said the city should consider whether fewer neighborhood routes would make sense for network function and financial impact. Move the collector road, put it on top of where the neighborhood route is. You reduce one of the neighborhood routes, move the collector road further to the higher density area, and you reduce cost. I think that the transportation network can still function. Washington County staff, she also said, Washington County staff gives deference to city staff to interpret the analysis and choose the preferred collector alignment for the future Kingston Terrace urban area. It's up to King City. One of the stated objectives was to have a gradual transition in the development from the natural area to the higher density. Stated objective, I think that should be followed. Repeatedly in the circulation analysis, it was mentioned that the collector road should be central to development. There should be connections to the existing city. Connections to the existing city just aren't working out. Alternative analysis, page 13, these factors are based on typical regulatory conservation principles of first avoid impacts and then minimize impacts if avoidance isn't possible. I believe that avoidance is possible. For Metro, if the city concludes that a road alignment that crosses some part of the easement area is the only viable alternative, the city must then take steps to protect the easement from any resulting impacts. There are viable alternatives. It was identified in the circulation analysis. It seems to be about money. You're looking for additional funding sources for the collector route. You're looking at federal and state funding to help pay for that. Let's not make our decision based on funding decisions. Let's make it based on what's best for the area. Your goals can still be achieved. Your robust 24-hour city, your 3,600 homes, your intracity connectivity can all be met by moving that roadway to the north. So please keep that in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, number 17.
Find my paper stick.
That's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm just going to read this. My name is Dave Robinson. I live on River Lane. I am opposed to the transportation system plan as it sits today. And you can read through this on your own. I've also got some stuff I've submitted in writing. The extension of Fisher Road as the following, began as one of 5 alternatives. Contrary to what you're being told, it is not stipulated by Washington County or Metro. This is a King City choice. Okay? It is simply not required. 3, it's the sole source of opposition to your transportation system plan. Every complaint you hear is this. No one's questioning the good stuff that will happen along, towards the west of Roy Rogers. Critically, this is unfunded. King City has no money to build the bridges. System development charges will not cover the cost, and developers will not build bridges. They are too risky, too expensive, and would wipe out any profit they would gain from building houses. They're not going to build them. So what's left? Okay, hope for money. So the transportation system plan now identifies it as a major regional arterial, right, in hopes of funding from county or government. They will not fund it. They have no money. Listen to the WCCC meetings and you will know they turn down every request that requires a small bridge over a gully, never mind a ravine next to a riparian area. They're not going to fund it. They don't have the money. Today, you were told the costs are approximately as high as $5 million per bridge. I highly recommend you guys do some independent study and verify that. Consider bioswale, moving ground, erosion and figure out those spans, I guarantee you it's 4 times that cost for one bridge. The bridge along Beast Bend at 146 washed out. Find out how much it cost to rebuild that one. And that's a long way from the river. So the other thing is this road is scheduled for 2043 in some of the planning documents, 20 years out. Start at the west, move east, and eventually connect. That's just another way of saying we really don't need it to build out west. We think it should connect, it could be a good connector. King City is not responsible to fix regional transportation problems. That is for Washington County to consider. King City should not be responsible to add a regional arterial to reduce traffic on Beast Bend. King City residents do not want this. I guess I would ask, without an extension of Fisher Road, do each of you believe Kingston Paris will still take place? Just imagine, no Fisher Road, will it take place? Yes, it will. It will be nice. So let's start with a plan that you can work. It's not going to open you up to litigation and all kinds of problems. Make that decision now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I believe up next we have 18.
I wasn't going to speak, and so here's my very official.
No problem. All right, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Janet Black, I live at 13960 Southwest River Lane, and like I said, I wasn't going to speak, but then I was hearing Mike's comments. I was at the Planning Commission when they were talking about the bridge, and Cedar Watts said that the crossing of the easement was going to be a bridge, and so it would not have any load on the dirt, and that was, I think, a selling point, or that helped the Planning Commission think they might do us an impact. In the master plan, and today, they talked about, well, maybe it's an open culvert. That's really different effect on it. So, and then Mike talked about the different costs of the bridge. It sounded like the length of the span would affect the cost of the bridge. And I started to wonder, well, who would decide that? And as Victoria was talking about, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are going to get involved, and it's getting permits. And I don't know how hard it is to get that for an open culvert. Others have talked about, you know, the edges of the ravine are unstable. This is a really important environmental area, which I think a lot of organizations have said, including the Wildlife Refuge, it's really important. Maybe that means you're going to be required to do a bridge of like the worst case scenario, bank to bank, which would be really expensive. So I guess I don't have the answer, but I'm just asking you to ask the question. Who decides what the crossing is? And once it's not, like, it may not be an option to have an open culvert. You may have to make the widest worst case bridge, and then the cost would be really high. And I'm just asking you to.
All right, thank you for your comments. Number 19.
I'm Dee Berkey, and I live at 12375 Southwest St. George here in KCCA. And we already have a lot of traffic on King George, especially around 4:30 on when work time ends. The house across the street from me, a house ran up in their, or a car ran up in their yard, took out part of their house. And also, right now the traffic is so bad, and they have speed bumps, but that doesn't work. They need a digital sign out there sometimes, and maybe police, and even turning on Fisher Road off of Queen Anne, you have to wait quite a while already. And anyway, I object to anything that makes Fisher Road have any more traffic than it has now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right, number 20. there anyone else who wishes to speak who has not spoken here in the room in opposition to the plan? I guess this will also be the last call for any comments online in opposition to the plan. We will move on to neutral comments in a moment, but if you are online and wish to speak, please indicate so. Right, hearing none, we will move on. I believe I know the answer to this, but we're going to do it anyway. So does anyone wish to provide neutral comments here in the room?
Is that a conflict if I want to make a neutral comment?
I will, as a point of order,
You know, I've been licensed for 20 years and staffed thousands of meetings, and I like to think I've seen it all, but I think we should. I mean, we only had 9 people testify, and if he was feeling negative and now he's feeling neutral, maybe that's a good thing.
all right, we will hear your neutral comment. You may come back up. We will give you 3 minutes. I will say, I will not invite individuals to just restate opposition posed as neutral, which I'm not saying you would do, but we're not going to open those floodgates here. And therefore, we will have 3 minutes, and go ahead and again state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Dave Robinson. I live on River Lane. My neutrality on the project has to do with all the good hard work that's gone into thoughtful roads, proper planning, looking for people who like lower income, stuff like that. So my neutrality on the plan is I like what's happening. It's going to develop out there, and I think you guys are doing a good job to get that. That was my neutrality. We can't avoid the expansion. Other than TSP.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right. Okay. At this time, we will ask staff if they have any rebuttal comments to make.
I did have one that I just forgot to mention earlier. It was mentioned that the Fisher intersection is already creating problems for folks that are turning left. I would concur with that. I believe that our TSP calls for additional right-hand turn lane.
Fisher intersecting with which road?
With 99W, sorry. So the Fisher intersection and 99W so there's a call for improvement from Queen Anne up to 99W, adding that additional lane for turning. I really believe that what we really need is 2 left-hand turn lanes and 1 right-hand turn lane, and not 2 right-hand turn lanes and 1 left-hand turn lane. So I think that's an amendment that I would recommend the council consider in addition to the other ones that I had mentioned.
That's a county road, right?
Fisher is a county road, yes. So it would take Washington County buy-in on that for us to make that improvement. But I think when we look at our aspirational projects, and Carlos can correct me if I'm wrong, I think technically that's a Washington County project, but would we list that in our transportation system plan, even if it's a Washington County project?
Good listed, right. It's very listed, it's just, he doesn't have the authority to implement it.
Right.
Certainly want to list it, just to get it on their radar.
Yeah. So I think we go back and ask our planner, our transportation planner on this to add that in there, add that language in, and then the footnotes about the 50-foot right of way. I think it was Earl and 137 things in the pre-existing right of way where possible. And then the depiction of a potential neighborhood route from 131st over to 15A, I thought it was. At 15A. That would be right here. And right here. So 6, the amendments that we were talking about, that we'll need to, scratch it.
I've already taken off.
Amendment. That one does not depict the trail already going across the Bigman natural area. As for staff rebuttals, there's a lot of evidence in the record, a lot of testimony, over 400 pages of testimony. Some is duplicitous, some is repeated testimony, but it's all captured in there. There's a lot of sentiment against Fisher Road extension or Kingston Terrace Boulevard going through that area. As a function of the master plan, we conducted a pretty elaborate alternative analysis that was called out in our findings. The results of that alternative analysis are referenced, not a part of this record, but it is a part of the master plan record. The reason it's not part of the transportation system plan record is, again, because the transportation system plan was coordinated and started prior to the master planning effort and prior to the area actually being brought into the urban growth boundary. So some of the initial studies and some of the initial planning work that went into the TSP predated the metro requirement that was rendered out of the conditions 18. Yes. Metro decision, I can't remember their number, but it is
18-1427.
Thank you. And so what we did, though, is we went back to TSP to address those. We went back and addressed those conditions in our findings. So the findings document that you see as attachment or Exhibit A of Ordinance 2301 has 68 pages worth of findings. A segment of that is pertaining to the metro conditions that rolled out there. You may see that one is actually, there's number 4 is missing. It might skip from number 3 to number 5, number 4 is missing because it's already being met by doing the planning work. So there's really no point in having it there when you look at those metro conditions. But all the other conditions we felt had been met. Metro submitted comments. It's under Exhibit B, CC-1. It was one of the last comments that come in before the deadline. In their findings, they identified how we satisfied those conditions and where we met the requirements for the transportation system plan. I would encourage the council to read all the comments that are in there if you haven't done already. Our next meeting would be in June. That would give you approximately 3 weeks to work and read all the information. There's, with the addition of volume 2, which is about 400 to 500 pages, you have Ordinance 2301, which is about 200 pages, plus the 400 pages of comments. You're roughly just over 1,000 pages of documentation to read through. Luckily, you've been apprised of everything along the way, so you've gotten updates and you've had this material available to you along for months now. So if there's any questions, I don't have much to rebut unless you have specific questions.
I have a couple of ones. To Mr. Mitchell's comments, and let me preface this by saying that I believe you have a kind of a confusing code section, and I believe Mr. Mitchell at all points has been acting in complete good faith. I just disagree with his interpretation of the code, or rather my interpretation is different. So there are certain decisions that are made by a planning commission, and those are final decisions. And when I read the code that allowed for a appeal of those, I had 2 thoughts. One is a planning recommendation is not a decision. And I thought, well, no, it's not, it's just a recommendation. And secondly, to the extent if it is a decision, if that automatically goes to the city council, then would there be a process for, would we need to have a parallel process for an appeal? And, I am given a little deference in my interpretation of the code, but you are given vast amounts of deference. And so what we let Mr. Mitchell know is that we take this question to City Council to interpret your code, which you did, and you determined, that, a recommendation wasn't a decision, so that process wouldn't be applicable. And also, you also interpreted your code to say that, if it was automatically coming before you, there wouldn't be a parallel, process for an appeal. And you didn't change the code. You interpreted the existing code, but I think all of us recognize that this code is confusing, that, someone could easily come to the same conclusion that Mr. Mitchell came to. And so when we do revise the code, which we're going to have to do anyway as part of this process later down the road, we flag that issue. And over the last couple of years, we've been flagging a number of issues where it's inconsistent terms or it's confusing, with the goal being that a member of the public could read it and understand exactly what council meant. So I do anticipate we'll be changing it in the future. It hasn't been changed yet. Regarding Ms. Bankston's testimony about me asking the Columbia Land Trust as well as her question, and in the planning commission meeting, I absolutely did. I can't remember which one testified first, but during their testimony, they were talking about the conservation easement, but they were also more holistically talking about protecting the property, which if you look at, like, I think Ms. Black entered this into the code, but it's a family's legacy of conservation. It's kind of representative of a lot of the evidence that we have in the record. And why this didn't occur to me previously, I have no idea. But it was during that testimony that I thought one of the ways, and because I'm a lawyer, I have multiple reasons for doing everything. One is to create a record. I thought, well, what if we gave them the option of permanent protection via zoning? And then cynically, I thought, if I ask the question, doesn't that demonstrate that we're trying to work with the Columbia Land Trust as well as the owner in order to meet the Metro condition, which then I can point to when I'm having that conversation with Metro of all the ways that we're trying to meet the condition. They couldn't have done a legally nothing would have been legally binding. Only you as the city council can make those sort of determinations. But it's probably a good idea to see what people want. So I then had conversations with Metro, quite a few, about, again, in part because, at least in my opinion, it's a good idea, in part because it helps demonstrate we're meeting the Metro condition, is wood buffering, so to protect the easement from other forms of urbanization, would that help meet the condition? And the answer to that was yes. As far as Metro is concerned, they thought that was a very good idea. So that's why all that happened. Both parties are represented by council. I have had that conversation with council as well. So I wasn't trying to do anything other than make our record. And then I think that's it. And just generally, the reason we want a record is that we can't possibly anticipate every possible appeal issue that might come up or what people will seize on. And so we want our findings to be great. We want outstanding findings that we can point to, because that's kind of like the cliff notes for thousands of pages of record. But if there's not something specific in the findings, then the task that at LUBA is there a rational basis for the decision? Can we point to evidence in the record? And I found out that's the hard way from Gerhardt related to short-term rentals, where our planner's findings had not really tracked, but we had everything in the evidence. So I was able to point to all those things, and we were able to prevail on all 7 errors or omissions in that case. So when you hear me pipe up and say something during the hearing, it's usually to make sure or ask you for interpretation. It's usually to make sure that we have something in the record. And our goal would be to prevent appeal. So our goal would be then, if we're conferred with, we would say, I understand you're upset, I understand what you don't want. Here's all the evidence, here's what's in the record, here's the legal standard that I can have out with the opposing counsel, and hopefully they can then confer with their client. And if it works out, we don't have an appeal, because I never want an appeal.
Thank you.
I'd just like to back up just a minute, because I think it's important that, council understand what the planning commission's recommendation was. And so I don't know if we ever went down that pathway, but the planning commission did recommend approval of the, transportation system plan and finding. They had 5 points that they wanted special considerations, or they wanted the council to take a look at. Those were, future of beef bend intersections or beef bend improvement, what those look like. There was the cost of bridges, including, drainage and design, which I covered in the presentation today. The, implementation of the Clean Water Services Area Plan and what that might look like. So in our conversations with Clean Water Services, their plan will be multifaceted and have many options, based on however development unfolds. They may go with pump stations, they may go with gravity, they prefer gravity, but it's not the end all. So they have multiple options that they can deploy and use to provide services to the area. That's been my understanding of that. They also mentioned the intersection improvements at 99 and Fisher, which I mentioned. And then also understanding the impact of any parallel routes that Tiger may be developing on Bull Mountain with Bull Mountain Road and Potomac and some of the other roads that they're putting through, traveling east-west as well. So those were the 5 points that they wanted to bring special considerations to the council regarding. With Mr. Watt on his points as well. I appreciate Mr. Robinson's comments. I think a lot of work has gone into this, and I do appreciate and definitely understand the resistance to Betty Fisher Road and all the nuances that go along with that and the growth that's happening over there and the fears that are associated with that and what that might look like. And whenever we can create systems to mitigate those impacts to the best of our ability, I think we need to be and provide for opportunities for us to do some traffic mitigation, traffic calming, things of that nature. Is it going to be the end all resolve all? Not. Probably not. You're still going to, our estimates are you're still going to get, of the traffic generated in the area, you're still going to get 40% of that traffic is probably going to be cut through traffic. They're just going in one direction or not necessarily stopping in King City. That's based on modeling figures that we came out with, or DKS has come up with from the very beginning, is that the local street network would accommodate about 60% of our local traffic. So what that means is of all the traffic that we're modeling over the course of the next 20 years, 60% of that traffic is just local traffic. And then 40% of that traffic would be considered to be cut-through traffic. So that traffic going through our area anyways, they're going to find a way, one way, shape, or form. What the modeling did indicate is without a robust transportation network, then other streets see those cut-through traffics. And those other streets that saw that, those impacts were 131st, Prince Albert, 123rd, 116th, Royalty Parkway, and on down. So saw lots of problems, lots of congestion problems. That's what that map was for earlier, show you where those problems were identified and where we're expecting those problems without a rather robust transportation network. So that's basically all I have, unless you want me to dive into the dry findings, the 70 pages of findings that are in.
There's one other point that I'd like to make, particularly for people that live in KCCA, because when I was writing the narrative for this application, I got to do kind of a deep dive into King City's history. I had a great aunt and great uncle that lived here, and there used to be a couple of hours during the summer where kids could splash around in the pool when it wasn't just laps, and so I used to come here to the child time. Very positive memories of them and the city. But one of the fascinating things is that after Measures 5 and Measures 50, King City was almost bankrupt. So there were conversations about whether to disincorporate and perhaps become privatized or what to do. And it's because the existing tax base simply couldn't pay for the level of services that were needed. And that actually is what caused the first urban growth boundary expansion to happen. Because the way our property taxes work, they were pegged to that 80s value, and then they only go up 3% a year. So it wouldn't be unusual for a house in King City to have in KCCA to have a real market value of 3 or 4 times what the assessed value is. But when the new houses are built, they come on at that, closer to the actual value, the actual price. And so each expansion area of King City actually, I don't want to say subsidizes, but really subsidizes the other parts because each part that's come on generates a higher tax than before. And which is why we have part of the reason we have the city staff we have, the police officers and things of that nature. So added traffic and more people is a burden of growth, but the taxes that would be generated and SBCs pay for the impact and future impact. So the KCCA section benefits from SBCs as well, even though they don't have to pay them unless they were to add a dwelling unit to their property, which because of the small lot sizes is very unlikely. So all these things are trade-offs, but one of the positive trade-offs of growth is that it will generate a lot more property taxes that are much closer to the real market value versus kind of a fraction of that. And so I think people will see great parks and connectivity and all those. So that is one benefit of growth that oftentimes is overlooked.
Thank you. I have a few questions, but I'll open it up. I guess first, Ronnie, do we need to, we just saw, for the record, we just saw an individual take a number out there. Is that?
No, that was for passport.
That was, okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure that we're doing. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to the rest of the council for questions of staff.
If I could, I just wanted to ask staff if they can clarify for the record, as there was one comment pertaining to the Fisher Road and 131st property and who owns it, just so that we make sure that's on the record.
Sure. I'll clarify for that. The property at the corner of 131st and Fisher is owned by Sonic Homes. They were in the process of developing. They need to put 3 power poles, remove 3 power poles and put the power lines in the ground. So they had to engineer a couple of PGE power vaults and arrange for the power to be disconnected and run underneath the road and brought to those power vaults. That took some time. It took PGE about 6 to 8 months to engineer those vaults and arrange for those vaults, once engineered, to be ordered and sent in. That being said, it basically delayed their project for almost a year, and so now here we are. They're getting ready to start back up. They are applying for variance because they ran into some code problems when they were going to submit for their building code. Their building permits, they ran into a code problem, so they're submitting for variance. That will probably come before the planning commission next month, and then we expect them to start going once again. They might even start going out there on the second lift of pavement and some of the other work on the site before they get their variance and building permit. That's where that sits in.
I would just add on to that, that anyone who wants to hear discussion about the road and, you know, how it looks now as opposed to what they have to build following the presentation can go to the last council meeting, recording and see all of that. We have quite a discussion on, the responsibility to put, the road back into the exact condition it was before the building started and so forth. So, other questions? And Councilor Otuli, if, I'm going to ask a couple questions, but prepare your questions, and then if you have some, we'll get to you in just one moment. So I just have, Peter, can you provide a little bit of clarity on the suggestion that some of the building permits may be denied for the crossing of the easement of Bankston property and so forth? Are there concerns, or what does that process look like? How viable are the ability to get the permits or not get the permits? Is that a concern?
No, not really. You know, practically speaking, how roads develop in cities is that we'll get development applications and they'll build to the edge of the property unless there's some sort of conditions that would make it not happen. And then the next parcel develops. And the city doesn't actually pay for that. What happens is when they record the plat, they deed the road and other elements of the subdivision to the city if the city wants it. There have been times where the city, King City, has said, well, no, you HOA keep that road and, you know, we're not gonna take it. Which is kind of a growing trend, actually. But, so what we would anticipate just on properties that have sold would be that the properties on the western edge are likely to develop first, and then it will continue to develop kind of headed east. So I don't know at what point it would actually reach the Bankston property. If it did, there are conversations that would need to occur. There are letters that would need to be written, in part for the benefit of the Columbia Land Trust, who, just to be clear, they're very opposed to this. I don't want to suggest that they're not, but they would need us to write a letter essentially threatening eminent domain, whether or not we would need to use eminent domain, because they are a nonprofit entity, and they're tasked with protecting this area, and they take it seriously. So we would need to write those sort of letters, and there would hopefully be some sort of conversation that will be palatable to everybody. King City in the past, I don't think you've ever used, I'm not aware of you using eminent domain. Cities don't like to use eminent domain. It would be, I think, pretty extreme circumstances where that would happen. So, but as far as traversing the, what would you call it, like drainage zone? Yeah, that happens all the time, and I wouldn't be terribly concerned about the Army Corps of Engineers. They take their job seriously as well. But in the grand scheme of things, as far as what we're traversing, it's not. It's less significant than others.
There would certainly have, the city would certainly, if the city was undertaking this, we would certainly have to undertake some mitigation and enhancement of this, the drainage that goes through there. The Army Corps of Engineers, National Marine Fisheries, Department of State Lands, they all work on like a wetland mitigation bank system. So you can create your wetland mitigation bank and you can use credits, or you figure out a way to do an enhancement and build capacity in the wetland system to offset your impact. And it's usually like a 3-to-1 exchange, or sometimes 5-to-1, or even 10-to-1 exchange sometimes, depending on the value that that wetland is assessed, right? So in my previous experience, when we were working in like the Columbia River, well, that would be like a 10-to-1 mitigation bank exchange. If we were working in wetlands, it was more of like a 3-to-1 mitigation. So, when you're doing something to this effect, it's a lot of permitting, it's a big lift. Some of those, the reason that bridge rate, the bridge and culvert rate varies so much from 200 to 300 is because of the permitting cost. So when you look to engineer a bridge, the initial numbers we got were like almost $200 a square foot. It's the engineering that adds that extra $100 a square foot. That's what we were told by our engineers at Contour, and it's not their new name these days. But, you know, that any sort of crossing is an undertaking, and it does require the joint application permit through the Army Corps of Engineers, National Marine Fisheries, U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of State Lands, DEQ. So I'm missing a few others, but it has to go through all of them. The tribes were mentioned, they also are on the discussion board as well. So that has to go through all those processes, and everyone gets a chance to comment on what they expect as mitigation on that.
FEMA occasionally.
Yes, FEMA floodplain. That was another reason that a lot of our roads are up further outside the floodplain, so that we could avoid interacting with the floodway or floodplain.
The benefit is that if you restore all the habitat upstream, then it better manages the water. So when people talk about like the negative impacts of Bull Mountain development, by restoring these areas, then you're actually lessening the burden on it. And so part of what these agencies do is make sure that you leave it better than you found it, as far as preventing flooding and doing all those things. So in addition to being good for the environment, there are a lot of other health and safety reasons that it makes sense to do all the work.
And I just wanted to point out one other thing. If, when we get to the zoning map or anything else like that, that Carla's family and city council want to establish a park zone on that property, my caution would be that, you know, then you don't have the developer coming through to pay for that road. So it might be something that the city has to pick up through some development charges or something to that effect. If it's that property, but I mean, if we're trying to protect it, and Mr. Watts brings up a good point, if we are going to zone that park to try to protect that area, then it might be a heavier lift from the city side for paying for those roads, or we figure out a development agreement with the developer nearby to help us pay for those, or we work it out through system development. There's a lot of different ways to work it through, but what we envision is that it goes in through development. So a developer who develops those properties, but essentially the developer is not going to develop those properties because of the park. Well, we have to figure out another way.
But there are a variety of tools like credits and other things. I mean, it's premature to have this conversation. But Metro is now kind of, I've had a lot of conversations with Metro about it, so I think that they'll expect some level of buffering. I think that's part of the reason they want the actual mapping, is because we can say whatever we want, but they want to lock us in so that, you know, we can make sure that we're walking the walk.
Kind of pigging back onto all of that, how is, and a lot of times, sometimes my questions end up, you know, in social media saying, oh, she's such an idiot, she doesn't know, she's asking a question. And like Peter, I like to make a record. I ask questions not always because I don't know the answer. But can you walk us through, how is the council, when we are concerned with the environmental impact, right? And we want to ensure kind of not just standard building practices, but like if we want to say, okay, we want to be a city and hold ourselves to a higher standard and be an example of best practices out there. And, right, we have all talked at various times about, right, being a sustainable and eco-friendly, and having eco-friendly, ecotourism, and being good shepherds of our waterways and so forth. How do we ensure that the building practices that are going to come over the next, let's just say 50 years, right, are going to be at the highest level of best practices, using best materials? So, for example, right, there's this permeable, there's new material that's being developed, new technology that's constantly being, upgraded and developed, where, right, it's permeable in the water or the roadway and better for downstream overflow, things like that. Can we take our vision and ensure that once the actual building practices happen, they are compliant with our vision? And it's and I guess more, it's not necessarily the vision and the building practices, it's accommodating the change in technology and the advancements in best practices, right? How they built 20 years ago is not how they're building today. So walk us through a little bit of the protections that are either there or as a council we can take to ensure some of those things are implemented. This is not a very well articulated question, but I think you probably get my gist, right? Yeah.
Well, first, there's a uniform building code for the state of Oregon. So all cities are held to a specific standard. It's a pretty high standard. It covers every city in the state and the unincorporated areas in the county. As far as how we deal with runoff and wastewater, that's really been changing over the past 20 years. Didn't used to see things like bioswales. There's the new technology as far as the water going through the street. We've seen that work really well in hot, warm climates like Arizona. They're still working to kind of get that, because we have, moss and mold and things like that. So people are still looking at that and how to make it best work in Oregon. But there will be kind of a menu of options. So whether it's through bioswales or something else, there's usually language in the code that would allow a developer to propose something else that much heightened scrutiny, because it's not specifically called out in the code, but there will be that ability. And then you can always amend your code as new best practices come forth. There is a rule called the fixed goalpost rules, which means that if they have an application in, they get to rely on the standards that are in place at the time their application is submitted to prevent cities from, changing up everything and burdening the applicant. But you can always change the code for best practices. There are certain levels of density that we need to hit because they're required by Metro. But if you look at housing density per square mile, the city of King City is actually 30% higher than the city. So King City has traditionally been a place that has been more affordable than the surrounding areas. That's still true, though not nearly as affordable as it was on a per unit basis like 10 years ago. The prices have gone up tremendously. So yeah, I mean, it's following state law. To the extent there are design elements that you guys want to prevent, that can be put into code. And then we have to look at the constantly evolving state law, because it seems like the state's taking less and less, allowing us to have less control. And their rules are becoming more prescriptive. So I'm seeing that a lot. Under the state statutes related to what needed housing, which is basically defines a lot of them. So yeah, those are kind of the elements. But again, I think that the good news is that usually everybody wants kind of an attractive product, because that's what sells for the most money. That's what rents for the rents. That's what sells for money. And I think that it's an attractive product that you've seen in King City. That also has been accessible to families and a lot of folks.
And I think a lot of this is going to be addressed in the master plan when we talk about like the graceful transitions and master plan are policies for protecting those Title 13 areas that mentioned in the comments previously, has those riparian connections and how we manage those areas that are actually within King City's sphere of influence. The areas that are actually in King City's sphere of influence are the riparian corridors 3 and then upland habitat A and B. So those would be regulated in-house by King City. The riparian corridors 1 and 2, those are monitored and regulated by Clean Water Services. You have like that interagency agreement.
Thank you for clarifying kind of those. I want to go just back to the traffic load projections again on Fisher Road. And one, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the modeling data, but from what I understand, that what you have said is that it's projected that 40% of the traffic is projected to be cut-through traffic. And one question I have is I'm assuming that in the modeling data, someone is counting cars over a period of time and extrapolates from that. How then, knowing that there's no point of origin and point of destination for a car that's going by that's being counted, what is the basis at looking at the cut-through traffic that's not part of the community versus out of the community? Are those assumptions based on what, right? Because obviously we know how many cars go past, but because we're assuming, right? I mean, everyone wants to assume that all the traffic problems in King City are others outside, not us, right? We wouldn't go fast. We wouldn't go cut through a stoplight. We wouldn't do that, right? It's those other people that don't live here that do it, right? We all know that's not true. We know that the majority of people who speed in our community are probably people that live here, right? It's just the nature of traffic and people driving. But how do we really get to an understanding of who is traveling on our roads? And I guess that.
I'm Carl Spring with EKS, the consultant project manager on the CSP. A little bit of background, the tool that we use to do the forecasting is actually a representation of the entire region, right? So when we do our forecasting, it's not just for King City and here, but King City and the entire metro area, including Vancouver. We're tracking trips started in throughout that region. So when we take a slice and we look at a particular route anywhere in the region, we can make a distinction between trips that start in the immediate start or end of that immediate area versus those that don't. That's some of the modeling process. But the modeling process is looking at who wants to go from this point to this point, and then what's the most convenient route for them to take. So that's one of the byproducts of the modeling process is that kind of a thing. So we just reported that when the question was asked about Fisher Road, and that's not unusual for collectors and arterials to have some component of outside traffic cut through, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's what arterials are designed for, is that kind of traffic. That's their primary function. But less so for collectors, so the lower the class of the streets, the more you have, the more local and the less through traffic you have. In this case, that was 40%. So when I looked at it, it looked like a good chunk was coming from Greater Beaverton, Hillsborough, trying to go south, right south, and mostly south on I-5 kind of thing. Wilsondale into other parts of Clackamas County. That's what it looked like to me. But that was just one slice of it. Again, you're pulling out a little thread of what's kind of a representation of a lot of trip tires. Hopefully I wasn't too technical.
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
That was kind of a question, I guess, to piggyback that, right? If Fisher Road didn't, stay as is today, or maybe to 137th or something, And I know a lot of discussion of, you know, some of the testimony is to push and have Beef Bend carry the load.
Sure.
What would Beef Bend have to look like if we were to push traffic, you know, over to that road?
Well, I mean, so the Fisher Road extension would not happen, is that the proposal?
Either that's like a scenario, right?
Scenario.
That not go through, or maybe do 137th to get some traffic under the power lines, but then use Beef Bend as,
Definitely all the through traffic would go somewhere else. It may go Beef Bend, it may go another way, right? They may continue. Go where they're trying to go that. Because again, you're talking about a big bubble of destinations. It's not like they're all going to one place. They're going to hundreds and thousands of places.
I guess my question is, how many lanes would Beef Bend have to be to carry the load between 99 and Roy Rogers if nothing was done to have any kind of connector?
Mike, correct me, but I think what we found was the eastern end of it would definitely be 5 lanes. That was the rub. We're trying to figure out how to not have eastern half of Beef Bend be 5 lanes because of the existing built communities around it, right? So the impact that comes along with making that a full-on 5-lane facility like Roy Rogers is very different kind of character of the street than what Mike represented in his image.
So we're saying eastern end from 99 to say 131st would be 5 lanes, and that 150th, and that would have to be taking out homes, garages, mobile home park,
It would definitely be
section there.
property impacts. We didn't really go into detail on what the impacts would be, but it was clear enough that there would be severe property impacts, right? So usually in the planning stage, you want to avoid big corridors of severe property impacts unless you have no other options.
Now, what other, in the master planning, through the alternative analysis, that particular item was reviewed and looked at, and at that point in time, I think that's when Washington County has said that's unacceptable and you'll need another plan.
In Metro, the people that would be, the units that would be displaced are the most affordable units. So it's small apartments, it's mobile homes, and there's, under our housing land use code, there's what's called Goal 10, and that is be housing for a variety of accounts. And so we're already in a housing affordability crisis. So anything that would displace affordable units with infrastructure was something that Metro was very uncomfortable with. So there's a lot of balancing that happens, and there were a lot of factors. Like if we thought we had a viable, as the opponents like correctly say, all the opposition is to that road. And really, like, one of the things that I've said is, if there was a viable alternative that met all of our core objectives, of course we would take it, because why would we get, have angry people at every meeting, really upset, and what's said on social media and things that people say about me and Mike and everything, like, we're not nihilists. I mean, we don't enjoy that at all. And the problem is, when it came down to it, weighing all the various factors, there really wasn't a viable alternative, but there haven't been things.
And then I think, then we saw the cross-section of the possible Beef Bend in the presentation. I think that was closer to the Roy Rogers 150th area, 2 lanes. There is open land now. If we did make that, if that was the county made that a 5-lane or something there, then we would create a funneling effect, right, at about 150, where we would have to pare it down.
Well, and then you create and then you create an obstacle essentially for community adhesion from the folks on the north side where the Art Ruffin Elementary School is and where our community is going to be. And so we had tried to coordinate with Tigard and Washington County on keeping Beef Bend at a size and nature that was approachable from the general general public that didn't feel like it was an obstruction or an obstacle between communities, north and south. And so that those communities would feel interlaced and connected.
Thank you.
I was just gonna, I'm kind of piggybacking on what Peter said, about how we as a city, all of us, are looking at all the different alternatives. And I guess my question to the staff is, in the alternatives analysis, was one of the things that was looked at what the community wants? Because I know that there's, looking at all these different factors, but one of those factors is what the community wants,
Yeah,
in my perspective.
there are 5 different alternatives, and, some of the community members were asking for a no connection look. What does it look like if everything gets moved back to Big Bend and there's no east-west connectivity? And, then
Sorry,
they want.
I didn't ask it right. What I meant was, on the alternatives analysis, there are different factors on each alternative that were looked at to come up with the recommendation for which alternative they're recommending that we adopt. Is one of those factors, what does the community want? As far as the alternatives that were given, I'm not.
So as far as what do the people that currently live in King City want?
Or the expansion.
If we provided notice to the people that live there, that we were looking at displacing them by widening Big Bend Road. So if we gave them public notice that they were going to lose their home, I anticipate that we would have had a huge number of very, very concerned. And because early on in that process, we developed with Metro and other stakeholders that we weren't going to do that we weren't going to displace people. And there was actually a route we could have taken that would go up and avoid the Bankston property all along. It wouldn't have impacted other people, but it would have impacted other people on the road, but we could have completely avoided the Bankston easement by heading north a few lots, and then like a very large house, like a very expensive house got built on that parcel. So that was taken off the table. And so early during our conversations with Metro, we knew that acquiring that property would be expensive, but we really thought that would be an option to avoid the easement, and then that option got taken away from us because we're still in litigation. Like, we don't have the money to buy that property on a speculative basis for UGB expansion. So as far as like providing legal notice to all the people that live, adjacent to Big Bend that they might be displaced, we didn't do it because Metro basically told us a no, and then having them like panic for 5 years about like theoretically losing their home, that'd be terrible, I would think. And so because we realized that just the Big Bend expansion wasn't a viable option, we didn't let them know what the impact on them would be.
It wasn't part of the plan, just based on the social justice aspects of that, and we just it was on the table and off the table as soon as we had discovered what it would take to do that.
And I don't think that answers Shauna's question, but I can answer Shauna's question, and the answer is no. The community's desire or opinion was not one of the factors that was analyzed in coming up with the alternatives, but the process of public engagement is, right, to take record of that. And one of the things that I will just note is that a long time ago, whatever year it was, right, due to the kind of large opposition that we had received, we decided to reanalyze the alternative route because we had gotten such a big feedback, right? And then we kind of took pause and we delayed almost a year, right, while we sent it back and had them reevaluate the alternatives analysis. And so I think what really she's asking, right, is it part of the criteria? My understanding is it is not one of the criteria, but that engagement and public opinion and comment and impact and, all of that is kind of been available at every step, and that's how I kind of take it, right?
Consideration as the project progresses.
Right.
You know, one of the first things that we had started in that was we were gonna do, quantifiable numeric evaluations, and we heard from the public, they didn't want that. They wanted it to be more, qualitative and less, pinpoint, figures. They didn't want numbers, they wanted pie charts. So we did pie charts, and then after we did pie charts, then we got feedback that, why did we do pie charts? We should have done numbers. So it's, you know, as you go through the process of public engagement and community involvement, you get a lot of crosstalk, a lot of differing opinions on how things should be conducted and how things should be done. I think the primary goal there is to establish a clear set of visions and goals and objectives, and then move through those objectives. And I think that's what FCJ did in that analysis. And they have over, gosh, that's another over 400-page analysis document that's part of the master plan. You know, so when we come to the master plan, in the near future, probably in June, then that would be a chance for the council to, bring up the evaluation process to Anna Sylvester, who was the lead consultant on that, and she's with STJ, and she'll be present at that point in time.
I'm gonna head over onto Zoom to Councilor Acholi, because we've had quite a few comments and conversations and questions, and Mr. Acholi has not been given an opportunity to ask any yet. So, Smart, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please indicate to Ronnie. If you don't, no problem, you don't have to, but I just want to give you an opportunity to speak if you so wish. And while we're waiting to see if Councilor Acholi wants to ask questions, if anyone else has any questions to ask of staff. And, all right, so far, Mr. Acholi has not indicated, so we're going to go ahead and move on. If anyone has any other questions, go ahead and, okay. Lori, any questions? No? Kate, do you have any questions? All right. Any final rebuttal comments that either of you want to make on the record? All right. At this time, I would ask for a motion to close or continue the public hearing. Oh, okay. Well, then let's go ahead and take a quick bio break now. It is almost noon. We will be coming to a close shortly, but let's give Mr. Acholi a few minutes to finish his telephone call and then be able to ask any questions that he might have. So we'll go off the record for 5 minutes while we take a bio break. All right. Okay.
I'm believing that.
I know.
Almost. So are you sure? Okay, can you get mine? you know, if he needs to ahead of time or to do so at the next, meeting.
You could ask again, just really quick, you might not have heard you.
Okay. Councilor Choli, do you have any questions and are available to ask them at this time? Otherwise, in about 10 seconds, I'll entertain a motion to close, or continue the public hearing.
Hey, Jamie, and everyone can hear me now?
Yep.
Yep, oh, thank you, all right.
All right, hey, I just want to say,
Uh-oh. Oh.
Started
You
talking.
muted himself.
sorry, did I
Smart,
break
you're
off?
on,
Sorry.
sorry,
Yep.
Smart, yeah, so,
Sorry about that.
just start over, because we didn't hear your question, so go ahead and start
Okay.
over, and we can hear you now.
Yes, again, I just want to say thank you very much for accommodating me not being able to be there in person. I had planned to be there, but last minute changes, developments happened, and I had to kind of call in. So thank you for accommodating my my last minute changes, the situational changes. Again, great discussions today. I just want to thank everyone for all the comments and everything that they kind of contributed to what we are doing. As a city, we've been doing a great job. We've been open to the public. We've been doing everything and inviting the residents to come in and see what we are doing and give them the opportunity to also contribute to what we are trying to do. We're doing this together. We all live in the city. We're all kind of trying to work on this to make this happen for the good of the city. What I have seen is people just going about trying to get petitions and get things, and they try to provide information to people while they get this petition. What I would caution the residents is to make sure that they read this information for themselves. Don't just have someone else interpret it for you and try to get you to kind of support any kind of petition that's out there. We're not against petitions. The people can go about gathering petitions, but I'll caution the residents to go out there, and we have that information. All the information that we're sharing, everything we're working on is available to everyone. It's not a hidden secret or anything, but don't let someone else interpret it for you. You can read it yourself and see what information is out there. Because the challenge that we'll all face is the fact that if we have misinformation out there, which kind of creates a panic, creates a kind of chaos and everything, we'll all fail in this. The goal is we all want to be successful at the end of this. We want to see a project that is successful for all of us to have a win-win situation. You know, so again, I really appreciate the opportunity for us all to open up to the residents, open up to everyone to come in and be able to join us in these discussions. And we'll continue to listen to people. And they keep saying we're not listening. We are listening. And that's why we keep holding these forums. We keep holding these platforms for everyone to have the chance to come in and voice your opinion and contribute to what we are doing. So if we're not listening, we'd have shut it and made the decisions by now. But we're still coming out and asking for more. Probably things that maybe our consultants have not seen, or things that we have not seen, or the perspectives that we're not looking at from. We welcome all of that from everyone from the community. So please don't feel frustrated. Don't feel as if this is a shut door, but this is something that we're trying to maybe force on anyone. No, that's why we're having this discussion. That's why we're having this open discussions and forums for everyone to come in and see what we're doing and also contribute to what we are doing. So again, we encourage everyone to keep participating. And I just want to thank everyone for what you do. I appreciate it all. The staff doing a great job, and our consultants, everyone doing a great job. I really thank everyone, and I appreciate all the professionalism and all the everything that everyone is kind of putting into this. We're all kind of trying to get this done in a way that's successful at the end of the day. Thank you. I appreciate it, Jamie, and the rest of the team.
Thank you, Councilor Choli. With that, at this time, I would ask for a motion to either close or continue, if that is your so desire, the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing for the King City Transportation System Plan file LU 2023-01.
Have a second?
Second.
All right, those in favor, raise your hand. Or do you want to do roll call on this one?
All seven.
Okay.
I'm sort of totally online, so.
All right. The motion is unanimous and carries. So therefore, I declare this public hearing closed on May 17, 2023 at 12:01 p.m. All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming. I will.
Thank you,
I will
Jamie.
say, Mike,
Thanks, Mike and Ronnie.
thank you. Thank you, Smart. We appreciate you accommodating us virtually today. So we'll see you later. Thank you.
Yes. Thank
Mike,
you.
for our second meeting, I would prefer, since when we deliberate, we're going to have discussion. I think it would be nicer if we could sit in a circle, since we're not going to have we're not going to have presenters or public comment. Is that possible, or should we stay up here?
Is it open to the public though?
It is open to
It's open
the
to
public.
public.
I'm just saying for a discussion, it might be nice to sit kind of in a, you know, okay, we'll sit here.
We have a full pack, because you
Budget as well after.
have budget, then you also have a bunch of other things after that.
Oh, okay, so well, we'll just stay up here. I just figured, so, for discussion, we can just push our chairs back a little bit if we want to have,
Yeah.
because it gets a little clunky when we're in a line.
Sure. But I gotta.
All right. Well, thank you guys
Yeah.
for coming and presenting and,
There's a public hearing is closed, public comment, but meeting is not adjourned, so.
oh, that's right, sit down, I apologize. Okay, that's right, thank you. The city council will reconvene for deliberations and the second reading of ordinance 2023-01 on June 14, 2023 at 6 p.m. So again, the second reading of the ordinance will be on June 14th, 2023 at 6 p.m. There will not be public testimony at that because the public hearing has been closed, but we will deliberate and discuss and take next steps at that point. So therefore, I will now entertain a motion to close the meeting for the day and adjourn. Yes, or a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Raise your hand. The motion unanimously carries and passes. Therefore, we are now adjourned. Thank you.